Karoline Leavitt wasn't someone who liked to sit idle. Growing up in a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other, she learned early on that life doesn't hand out free passes. Her parents worked hard, her dad as a mechanic and her mom running a tiny diner downtown, and they taught her the value of grit and determination. Karoline soaked it all in. She was the kind of girl who stayed late after school to help teachers clean up classrooms just because she wanted to be useful. As she grew older, her dreams became clearer. She wanted stability, respect, and a chance to prove herself in a world that often felt stacked against people like her. Her journey wasn't easy. While others partied or took breaks during college, Karoline juggled 2 jobs to pay for her education. By day, she worked at a local cafe, serving coffee and pastries with a smile that could light up even the gloomiest mornings. By night, she cleaned offices, making sure every desk was spotless before heading home to study. It wasn't glamorous, but Karoline didn't care. She had a goal, and nothing was going to stop her from reaching it. After years of grinding, she finally landed what seemed like the perfect job, an assistant manager position at a trendy boutique in the city. The shop was known for catering to wealthy clients who loved luxury items and fashionable accessories. For Karoline, this role wasn't just about earning a paycheck, it was about proving to herself that all her sacrifices had been worth it. At first, everything seemed fine. Her co-workers were polite, the customers appreciated her attention to detail, and her boss complimented her work ethic. But beneath the surface, cracks began to show. The boutique prided itself on being progressive and inclusive, a place where liberal values reigned supreme. While Karoline didn't have any issue with that, she quickly realized that her own beliefs didn't align neatly with the majority. She kept her opinions to herself, focusing instead on doing her job well. Over lunch breaks, she listened silently as colleagues discussed politics, environmental issues, and social justice movements. Sometimes, she agreed with them. Other times, she found herself biting her tongue to avoid stirring up trouble. One Friday afternoon, however, silence wasn't enough. Her manager called her into his office, his expression unreadable. Karoline walked in, clutching a folder of inventory reports she'd been working on all week. Before she could say anything, he cut straight to the chase. "I've heard some concerning things," he said, leaning back in his chair. His tone was calm but firm. "Comments you made during lunch earlier." Karoline blinked, confused. "What comments?" she asked, genuinely baffled. He hesitated for a moment, then listed off vague remarks supposedly overheard by another employee. None of them sounded familiar to her, but she couldn't deny them without proof. Without giving her a chance to defend herself, he slid a termination letter across the desk. "Look, I think you're talented, but this isn't a good fit," he said, avoiding eye contact. Karoline felt like the floor had been pulled out from under her. All those years of sacrifice, all the hours poured into building a career, and now this? She tried to argue, to explain that she hadn't said what he accused her of, but he dismissed her protests. Within minutes, she was packing her belongings into a cardboard box and walking out of the building, humiliated and angry. That evening, as she sat alone in her car in the parking lot, tears streaming down her face, Karoline wrestled with a mix of emotions. Anger bubbled inside her, not just at her manager, but at the unfairness of it all. Sadness followed close behind, weighing heavily on her chest. How would she tell her husband, Daniel, that she'd lost her job? They relied on her income to keep their household running smoothly. And yet, amidst the storm of negative thoughts, a flicker of defiance began to grow. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning of something else entirely. Little did she know the next day would bring an unexpected twist that would change everything. The next morning, Karoline woke up with a heavy heart. She lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how she was going to break the news to Daniel. Her husband had always been her rock, steadfast, supportive, and endlessly kind, but even rocks have limits. How would he react when she told him that she'd been fired? Would he be disappointed in her? Angry? Or worse, worried about their finances? She finally dragged herself out of bed and shuffled into the kitchen, where Daniel was already making breakfast. He greeted her with his usual cheerful smile. completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her. "Morning," he said, flipping, pancakes on the stove. "You want some coffee?" Karoline nodded silently, clutching the mug he handed her like it was a lifeline. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she stared down at the table, tracing invisible patterns with her finger. Before she could gather the courage to say anything, a loud honk echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Both Karoline and Daniel froze, exchanging puzzled glances. They didn't own a car loud enough to make that kind of noise. Curious, Karoline walked over to the window and peeked outside, and nearly dropped her coffee mug. There, parked right in their driveway, was a gleaming Rolls-Royce. It looked like something out of a dream, its polished surface catching the sunlight and reflecting it back in dazzling waves. "What in the world?" Karoline muttered under her breath, stepping onto the porch for a closer look. Just then, the driver's door swung open and Daniel stepped out, grinning from ear to ear. He spread his arms wide as if presenting the car like a prize on a game show. "Surprise!" he exclaimed, clearly thrilled by the shocked expression on Karoline's face. Karoline blinked rapidly, struggling to process what she was seeing. "What is this?" she stammered, pointing at the luxurious vehicle like it might disappear if she looked away for too long. Daniel laughed, walking over to join her on the porch. "It's mine," he said proudly, running a hand along the sleek hood of the car. "Well, ours, technically. I've been saving up for months, and yesterday I finally pulled the trigger. Isn't she beautiful?" Karoline felt like her brain was spinning in circles. A Rolls-Royce? Yesterday? The timing couldn't have been more bizarre or ironic. Here she was, freshly unemployed and drowning in self-doubt, while her husband rolled up in a car that screamed wealth and success. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but another part of her couldn't shake off the guilt, gnawing at her insides. How could they possibly justify owning something so extravagant when she didn't even have a job anymore? Sensing her hesitation, Daniel's smile softened. He reached out and took her hands in his. "Hey, I know this seems crazy," he admitted, his voice warm and reassuring. "But we've worked hard for this, okay? You've sacrificed so much for us, and now it's my turn to do something big, for both of us." His words struck a chord deep within Karoline. She realized that Daniel wasn't just buying a car. He was celebrating their resilience, their partnership, and everything they'd overcome together. Still, the weight of her situation pressed heavily on her shoulders. As much as she appreciated the gesture, she couldn't ignore the fact that their lives were about to change dramatically. Owning a Rolls-Royce meant drawing attention, something neither of them had ever sought. And given the circumstances surrounding her recent dismissal, Karoline couldn't help but wonder how people would react. Would they judge them? Accuse them of flaunting wealth during uncertain times? These thoughts swirled in her mind as she forced a small smile and hugged Daniel tightly. For the rest of the day, the Rolls-Royce remained parked in their driveway, gleaming under the afternoon sun. Neighbors stopped by to admire it, offering congratulations and compliments. Some seemed genuinely happy for them, while others wore expressions that hinted at skepticism or envy. Karoline watched it all unfold with mixed emotions. On one hand, she loved seeing Daniel so proud of himself. This was a dream he'd talked about for years, a symbol of everything he'd worked toward. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that their newfound luxury stood in stark contrast to her current reality. That evening, as they sat together on the couch watching TV, Karoline turned to Daniel with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we're ready for this?" she asked softly. "I mean, not just the car, but everything it represents. People are going to talk." Daniel considered her question for a moment before responding. "Let them," he said simply, shrugging his shoulders. "We can't control what other people think, but we can control how we live our lives. Besides," he added with a wink, "if anyone asks, I'll just tell them it's your reward for being such an amazing wife." Karoline chuckled despite herself, leaning her head against his shoulder. For the first time since losing her job, she allowed herself to feel a spark of hope. Maybe getting fired wasn't the end of the road after all. Maybe it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with unexpected twists, challenges, and opportunities waiting to be seized. The following week, life in the Leavitt household took on a surreal quality. The Rolls-Royce became the center of attention, not just for their neighbors, but for Karoline herself. Every time she glanced out the window and saw it gleaming in the driveway, she felt a strange mix of pride and unease. Pride because it was a testament to Daniel's hard work and determination. Unease because it seemed like such an extravagant purchase at a time when her own career had derailed so abruptly. Karoline tried to push those feelings aside and focus on what came next. Sitting around feeling sorry for herself wasn't going to help anyone. She knew she needed to figure out her next move, but the thought of starting over felt overwhelming. What could she do? Go back to working at another boutique? That idea left a bitter taste in her mouth after how things ended with her last job. No, if she was going to rebuild her life, she wanted it to be on her own terms. One afternoon, while sipping tea on the porch, Karoline noticed something curious. A woman from down the street walked by, paused, and stared at the Rolls-Royce with wide eyes before continuing on her way. It wasn't the first time someone had stopped to gawk at the car, but this particular moment struck Karoline differently. She realized that people were drawn to luxury, not just because of its shine or status, but because it represented possibility. The Rolls-Royce wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of dreams being fulfilled. And suddenly, an idea began to form in her mind. That evening, as Daniel cooked dinner in the kitchen, Karoline sat at the table sketching out her thoughts. "What are you working on?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. She hesitated for a moment, then slid the paper toward him. On it was a rough outline of a business plan, a boutique unlike any other. Not one that catered solely to wealthy clients or preached about progressive ideals, but a store where everyone felt welcome, regardless of their background or beliefs. Daniel studied the notes carefully, his brow furrowing in concentration. When he finally looked up, there was a spark of excitement in his eyes. "This is incredible," he said, grinning. "You've been through enough bad experiences with workplaces that didn't value you. Why not create something that does?" His enthusiasm gave Karoline the courage to take her idea seriously. Over the next few days, she dove headfirst into research. She spent hours online reading articles about entrepreneurship, marketing strategies, and customer service trends. She visited local shops to observe how they operated, and talked to friends who owned small businesses to learn from their successes and mistakes. Each step forward filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. Doubts crept in late at night when the house was quiet, and the weight of uncertainty pressed down on her chest. Could she really pull this off? What if she failed? What if people judged her for trying? These questions haunted her, but they also pushed her to dig deeper. She reminded herself of everything she'd overcome already. The long nights studying, while working 2 jobs, the sting of rejection when doors closed in her face, and now the humiliation of being fired unfairly. If she could survive all that, surely she could handle whatever came next. As her confidence grew, so did her vision for the boutique. She imagined shelves stocked with high-quality products sourced from artisans across the country. She pictured cozy seating areas where customers could relax and chat without feeling rushed. Most importantly, she envisioned a space where kindness and inclusivity weren't just buzzwords, they were cornerstones of the entire operation. This wouldn't just be a store. It would be a community hub where people from all walks of life could connect and feel valued. To bring her dream to life, Karoline knew she'd need more than just passion. She'd need resources. Money was tight, especially since she was no longer bringing in a steady paycheck. But instead of letting that discourage her, she got creative. She sold some old furniture and clothes online, funneling every penny into her growing fund. Daniel pitched in too, offering part of his savings despite her protests. "We're in this together," he insisted whenever she tried to argue. "Besides, I bought the Rolls-Royce for us. Let me invest in your dream now." With their combined efforts, Karoline managed to scrape together enough money to secure a small storefront downtown. It wasn't much, a narrow space sandwiched between a bakery and a bookstore, but it had potential. As she stood inside the empty building for the first time, imagining racks of clothing and displays of accessories filling the room, she felt a surge of hope. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, losing her job had been a blessing in disguise. By the end of the month, Karoline had transformed the space into something unrecognizable. Walls were painted a soft cream color, shelves lined with reclaimed wood added warmth, and potted plants brought life to every corner. Friends and family pitched in wherever they could, helping her hang curtains, arrange furniture, and stock inventory. The process was exhausting, but it also reignited a fire within her that she hadn't realized had dimmed. When everything was finally ready, Karoline stepped back and surveyed her work. Her heart swelled with pride. This wasn't just a boutique, it was proof that she could rise above adversity and build something meaningful. Tomorrow, she would open the doors to Grace and Style, welcoming customers into a space designed to make them feel seen, heard, and appreciated. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: she was ready to face them head-on. The morning of the grand opening arrived, and Karoline woke up before sunrise. She lay in bed for a few moments, staring at the ceiling as her mind raced with anticipation. Today was the day she had been working toward for months. A chance to step into her own vision and prove to herself that she could create something truly special. But as excited as she was, nerves bubbled beneath the surface. What if no one showed up? What if people didn't like what she'd built? The thought of failure loomed large, but she quickly shook it off. Today wasn't about fear. It was about faith in herself, in her dream, and in the community she hoped would embrace it. By the time Daniel joined her in the kitchen, she was already dressed and sipping on her second cup of coffee. He gave her a reassuring smile. "You ready for this?" he asked, leaning against the counter. Karoline nodded, though her hands trembled slightly around the mug. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied with a nervous laugh. Daniel reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "You've got this. This is your moment." After breakfast, they headed downtown together, the Rolls-Royce gliding smoothly through the quiet streets. As they pulled up to Grace and Style, Karoline felt a lump form in her throat. The storefront looked perfect. Fresh flowers adorned the entrance, a hand-painted sign read "Grand Opening" in bold letters, and soft music played from a speaker set up outside. It was everything she'd envisioned and more. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that today would define so much, not just for her business, but for her confidence as well. As the clock ticked closer to opening time, customers began trickling in. At first, it was just a few curious passers-by drawn in by the festive decorations or enticed by the promise of discounts. But soon word spread, and the boutique filled with chatter and laughter. People browsed through racks of clothing, admired handmade jewelry displayed on velvet trays, and complimented the cozy ambiance. Karoline moved among them, greeting each person with a warm smile and genuine interest. She made sure to ask their names, listen to their stories, and offer personalized recommendations. It wasn't just about making sales, it was about building connections. One customer stood out in particular, an older woman who wandered in clutching a reusable shopping bag. Her eyes scanned the room cautiously, as if unsure whether she belonged. Karoline approached her gently. "Hi there. Welcome to Grace and Style. Is there anything I can help you find?" The woman hesitated, then admitted she was looking for a gift for her granddaughter's birthday. Together they sifted through scarves and earrings until they found the perfect piece, a delicate silver bracelet engraved with tiny stars. The woman's face lit up as she held it up to the light. "This is exactly what I wanted," she said, softly, her voice tinged with gratitude. In that moment, Karoline realized why she'd poured her heart into this project. Moments like these, the small acts of kindness and shared joy, were what mattered most. By mid-afternoon, the shop buzzed with energy. Friends stopped by to congratulate Karoline. Neighbors chatted over cups of complimentary tea, and even strangers lingered longer than expected, struck by the welcoming atmosphere. One young man, barely out of college, shyly asked if he could leave his resume. "I've always loved fashion," he confessed, "but I've never seen a place like this before." Karoline promised to consider him, touched by his enthusiasm. As the day wound down, Karoline sat behind the counter, exhausted but elated. Daniel appeared beside her, holding 2 bottles of sparkling water. "Well?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "How does it feel to be a boss lady now?" Karoline chuckled, leaning back in her chair. "It feels surreal," she admitted, "but good. Really good." For the first time in weeks, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. She hadn't just opened a store. She'd created a space where people felt valued, and that meant more to her than any paycheck ever could. That evening, after locking up and heading home, Karoline reflected on the whirlwind of emotions she'd experienced throughout the day. There were highs, like seeing customers beam with delight as they discovered treasures they loved, and lows, like moments when self-doubt crept in and whispered cruel reminders of past failures. But overall, the response had been overwhelmingly positive. People weren't just buying products, they were investing in her vision, supporting her journey, and becoming part of her story. Back at home, as she settled onto the couch with Daniel, Karoline allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. The Rolls-Royce sat parked outside, its presence still striking yet somehow less intimidating now. It symbolized more than wealth or luxury. It represented resilience. Just like that car, she too had weathered storms and emerged stronger on the other side. As Daniel flipped through TV channels, Karoline glanced at him and smiled. "Thank you," she said quietly. He turned to her, puzzled. "For what?" "For believing in me," she explained. "Even when I didn't believe in myself." Daniel grinned, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Always," he said simply. For the first time in a long while, Karoline drifted off to sleep with a sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and perhaps even new setbacks. But tonight, she let herself bask in the glow of accomplishment and the knowledge that she had taken a step toward creating not just a business but a legacy. The days following the grand opening of Grace & Style were a whirlwind. Word about the boutique spread quickly, thanks to social media posts from happy customers and glowing reviews shared among friends. Karoline found herself busier than she'd ever been in her life, juggling orders, restocking shelves, and greeting new faces every day. But despite the chaos, she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. Every morning she woke up with purpose, eager to step into the world she had created, a space that reflected her values and vision. Of course, running a business wasn't without its challenges. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when shipments arrived late, leaving her scrambling to fill gaps in inventory. Other times, customers walked out empty-handed because they couldn't find exactly what they were looking for. And then there were the critics, those who whispered behind her back or left snarky comments online about how a Rolls-Royce owner shouldn't be running a small shop. Those words stung, but Karoline refused to let them define her. Instead, she used them as fuel to work harder, serve better, and prove that success wasn't about appearances. It was about impact. One afternoon, as Karoline arranged scarves on a display rack near the window, she noticed a familiar face walk through the door. It was her old manager, the same man who had fired her just months ago. Her stomach tightened instantly. She hadn't seen him since that fateful Friday, and she certainly hadn't expected to see him here. He glanced around the boutique, his expression unreadable before approaching the counter where she stood. "Karoline," he said, nodding awkwardly. "I heard you open this place. Thought I'd stop by." His tone was polite, almost hesitant, but Karoline could sense an undertone of discomfort. Part of her wanted to confront him, to ask why he'd dismissed her so coldly without giving her a chance to defend herself. But instead she forced a smile and nodded. "Thanks for coming," she replied evenly. "Take a look around. Let me know if you need anything." As he browsed the store, Karoline watched him carefully. She wondered if he felt guilty, or maybe even impressed. Either way, she didn't care. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about her proving to herself that she was capable of far more than anyone, including him, had given her credit for. When he finally approached the register holding a leather wallet, she rang him up with professionalism, refusing to let any emotion seep into their interaction. As he left the shop, she exhaled deeply, realizing she no longer carried the bitterness she once had. Closure came not from confrontation, but from moving forward. That evening, as Karoline closed up the shop, Daniel arrived to pick her up in the Rolls-Royce. "How was your day?" he asked, noticing the thoughtful look on her face. She hesitated for a moment before telling him about her encounter with her former manager. To her surprise, Daniel didn't react with anger or frustration. Instead, he smiled knowingly. "You know what's funny?" he said. "He probably thinks he ruined your career, but all he did was set you free." Daniel's words lingered in Karoline's mind long after they got home. He was right. Losing that job had been painful, yes, but it had also pushed her to take risks she might never have considered otherwise. Without that setback, she wouldn't have discovered her own strength or built something truly hers. For the first time, she realized that failure isn't always the end. It can sometimes be the beginning of something greater. As weeks turned into months, Grace and Style continued to thrive. Customers kept coming back, not just for the products but for the experience. They loved the friendly atmosphere, the attention to detail, and the way Karoline remembered their preferences. Slowly but surely, the boutique became a staple in the community, a place where people gathered to shop, chat, and connect. Karoline made it a point to host events too, like styling workshops and local artisan showcases, further cementing her role as a supporter of small businesses and creative talent. But perhaps the most rewarding aspect of her journey was the relationship she formed along the way. One regular customer, a single mother named Lisa, often brought her young daughter to the shop. The little girl adored trying on hats and playing dress-up in the fitting room, while Lisa browsed for affordable yet stylish pieces. Over time, Karoline and Lisa became close, sharing stories about their lives and cheering each other on during tough times. It reminded Karoline of why she started this venture in the first place. Not just to sell clothes, but to create a space where people felt seen and supported. Another unexpected blessing came in the form of the young man who had left his resume on opening day. After some consideration, Karoline decided to hire him part-time. His name was Alex, and though he was inexperienced, his passion for fashion shone through in everything he did. Under Karoline's guidance, he quickly learned the ropes and became an invaluable member of the team. Watching him grow gave her immense satisfaction, knowing she was helping someone else achieve their dreams. Despite her growing success, Karoline remained grounded. She knew how quickly fortunes could change, and she didn't take anything for granted. Each morning, she wrote down 3 things she was grateful for, reminding herself to stay humble and focused. Whether it was a kind note from a customer, a compliment from a stranger, or simply the sight of the sun rising over the city, these small moments kept her anchored. By the 6-month mark, Grace and Style had exceeded all expectations. Sales were steady, the community embraced her fully, and Karoline finally allowed herself to feel proud of what she'd accomplished. Yet, she also understood that this was only the beginning. There were still goals to chase, lessons to learn, and dreams to pursue. As she locked up the shop one evening and climbed into the passenger seat of the Rolls-Royce, she turned to Daniel with a grin. "You know," she said, "I think we're just getting started." And for the first time in a long while, she believed it wholeheartedly. As Grace and Style entered its 2nd year, Karoline found herself reflecting on how much had changed, not just in her business, but in her life. The boutique wasn't just a store anymore, it was a thriving hub of connection and creativity. Customers came not only to shop, but to share stories, seek advice, or simply enjoy the cozy atmosphere. And while the success was gratifying, what truly mattered to Karoline was the sense of purpose she felt every day. She was no longer just an employee following someone else's rules. She was the architect of her own world. But running a business also meant facing challenges that tested her limits. One of the biggest hurdles came when a larger chain store opened just 2 blocks away. It was sleek, modern, and offered deep discounts that smaller shops like hers couldn't compete with. At first, Karoline panicked. Would customers abandon her for cheaper prices? Could she keep up with the competition without sacrificing the values she'd built her business on? Instead of letting fear take over, Karoline decided to lean into what made Grace and Style unique. She doubled down on personal touches, handwritten thank you notes in every purchase, freestyling consultations, and exclusive events for loyal customers. She introduced Community Fridays, where local artists could showcase their work in the shop, turning it into a rotating gallery of sorts. These efforts didn't just retain her existing customer base, they attracted new ones who appreciated the authenticity and heart behind her brand. One Friday evening during one of these community events, something unexpected happened. A woman walked in holding a stack of flyers advertising her handmade jewelry line. She looked nervous, almost hesitant, as if unsure whether she belonged. Karoline recognized the look immediately. It was the same uncertainty she'd felt when opening her own boutique. Without hesitation, she invited the woman to set up a small display near the cash register. By the end of the night, the woman's jewelry had sold out, and she left beaming with gratitude. That moment reminded Karoline why she started this journey, to uplift others, just as she had been uplifted by Daniel and countless others along the way. From then on, she made it a priority to support other entrepreneurs, especially women trying to break into industries dominated by big players, whether it was hosting pop-up shops, sharing their products on social media, or simply offering advice over coffee. Karoline became known as someone who gave back as much as she received. Despite her growing reputation, Karoline never lost sight of her roots. She still drove the Rolls-Royce occasionally, mostly because Daniel loved taking it out for weekend drives, but she preferred walking or biking to work most days. To her, the car was less about luxury and more about resilience. ATD, reminder of how far they'd come together. Whenever people asked about it, she laughed and said, "It's just a car. What really matters is what you do with your life." Her humility endeared her even more to the community. People admired her not just for her success, but for her kindness and willingness to stay grounded. Neighbors often stopped by the shop just to chat, and local newspapers began featuring her story as an example of perseverance and innovation. Yet Karoline remained humble, always quick to credit her team, her husband, and her customers for helping her succeed. One particularly memorable day, a reporter from a regional magazine visited the boutique to write a feature article. As they toured the space, the reporter asked Karoline about her proudest achievement. For a moment, Karoline hesitated. Was it surviving being fired unfairly? Opening her own business? Building a loyal customer base? Then she realized none of those milestones compared to the relationships she'd formed along the way. "My proudest moment," she said finally, "is seeing people walk out of here feeling valued. Whether it's a customer finding the perfect outfit or an artist selling their first piece, those moments remind me why I do this." The article was published a few weeks later, and it brought even more attention to Grace and Style. Orders poured in online, and tourists visiting the city started adding the boutique to their must-visit lists. But with increased visibility came new pressures. Some critics argued that her shop catered too much to small-town charm and needed to modernize further. Others accused her of capitalizing on her struggles to gain sympathy. Though the comments stung, Karoline refused to let negativity derail her focus. She knew who she was and what she stood for, and that was enough. Amidst all the growth, there were quieter victories too. Alex, the young man she'd hired part-time, had blossomed into a confident sales associate with a knack for styling clients. He confided in Karoline one afternoon that working at the boutique had inspired him to pursue design school. "You showed me I could dream bigger," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. Karoline hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with pride. Moments like these reminded her that success wasn't measured in profits alone. It was measured in lives touched. By the end of the year, Grace and Style had become more than just a boutique. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and possibility. Karoline often thought about how different her life might have been if she hadn't been fired from her previous job. That setback had forced her to step out of her comfort zone and create something extraordinary. Now standing behind the counter of her bustling shop, watching customers laugh and browse, she realized that failure wasn't the opposite of success. It was part of the journey. As the holiday season approached, Karoline decorated the boutique with twinkling lights and garlands, filling it with warmth and cheer. Daniel joined her one evening to hang ornaments on a small tree in the corner. "You know," he said, stepping back to admire their handiwork, "this place feels like home." Karoline smiled, wrapping her arms around him. "It does," she agreed. "And we built it together." In that moment, surrounded by the fruits of her labor and the love of her partner, Karoline felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Life hadn't gone according to plan, but perhaps that was the beauty of it. Sometimes the best stories are written not in straight lines, but in twists, turns, and unexpected detours. And hers was just beginning. As the years rolled on, grace and style continued to grow in ways Karoline never imagined. What began as a small boutique tucked between a bakery and a bookstore had transformed into a beloved cornerstone of the community. The shop wasn't just known for its carefully curated products or cozy atmosphere. It was celebrated for the way it brought people together. Strangers became friends over shared fashion tips, artists found platforms to showcase their work, and families made memories, browsing through racks of clothing during weekend outings. For Karoline, this sense of connection was worth far more than any financial success. But life, as always, kept throwing curveballs. One spring morning, Daniel came home from work looking unusually serious. He sat Karoline down at the kitchen table and explained that his company was relocating him to another city, a big opportunity that could advance his career significantly. Karoline's heart sank. Moving meant leaving behind everything they'd built, the boutique, the friendships, the life they cherished. How could she possibly uproot something so deeply rooted? For days they debated what to do. Should they sell the shop, close it temporarily, or stay put while Daniel commuted long distances? None of the options felt right. Finally, after countless, sleepless nights, they landed on a solution. They would keep the shop open, but Karoline would take on full responsibility while Daniel balanced his new role with frequent visits home. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable, and it allowed them to hold on to both their dreams. Running the boutique alone wasn't easy. Karoline missed having Daniel around to share the highs and lows, to celebrate milestones and brainstorm ideas. But she quickly discovered that the community she'd nurtured stepped up in his absence. Friends offered to help out during busy seasons. Regular customers volunteered advice on marketing strategies, and Alex, now her trusted assistant manager, took on more responsibilities without hesitation. Together, they formed a team that felt like family. The distance between Karoline and Daniel tested their relationship in ways neither of them anticipated. There were lonely nights when she questioned whether they were making the right choice. Yet every time doubt crept in, she reminded herself of why they'd started this journey together. They weren't just building careers. They were creating a life filled with purpose and meaning. Phone calls, video chats, and surprise weekend visits helped bridge the gap, keeping their bond strong despite the miles. One summer evening, as Karoline closed up the shop, she noticed a familiar figure leaning against the Rolls-Royce parked outside. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Daniel, grinning ear to ear with a bouquet of wildflowers in hand. "Surprise," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. She laughed through tears, overwhelmed by his unexpected arrival. Over dinner that night, he revealed the real reason for his visit. He'd negotiated a transfer back to the area. His company had agreed to let him lead a satellite office closer to home. "We've sacrificed enough," he told her firmly. "It's time we focused on us." With Daniel back in town, Karoline felt like she could breathe again. Their partnership flourished not only at home, but also within the business. Daniel brought fresh ideas to the table, suggesting collaborations with local influencers and hosting charity events to give back to the community. Under their combined leadership, grace and style reached new heights, earning recognition beyond the city limits. People traveled from neighboring towns just to experience the magic of the little boutique that had become so much more than a store. Looking back on everything they'd been through, Karoline realized how much she'd grown. Not just as a business owner, but as a person. Losing her job all those years ago had been devastating, but it had forced her to confront her fears, trust her instincts, and embrace uncertainty. That setback had led her to build something truly extraordinary, a legacy rooted in kindness, resilience, and authenticity. She often thought about her old manager and wondered if he ever realized the unintended gift he'd given her by letting her go. Without that moment of rejection, she might never have discovered her true potential. On the 5th anniversary of Grace and Style, Karoline threw a party to thank everyone who had supported her along the way. The shop overflowed with laughter, music, and heartfelt conversations. As she stood in the middle of it all, surrounded by smiling faces, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This wasn't just her achievement. It belonged to everyone who had believed in her vision, cheered her on, and reminded her that she was capable of greatness. Later that night, as she and Daniel cleaned up together, he turned to her with a mischievous grin. "So," he said, "what's next?" Karoline paused, considering the question. For so long, her focus had been on survival and growth. Now, standing on solid ground, she allowed herself to dream bigger. Maybe it was time to expand, to open a second location or launch an online store. Or maybe it was time to slow down and enjoy the fruits of her labor, spending more time with the people who mattered most. Whatever the future held, Karoline knew one thing for certain. She was ready. Life had taught her that challenges weren't roadblocks. They were stepping stones. Every failure, every triumph, every twist in the road had shaped her into the person she was today. And though the journey ahead would undoubtedly bring new obstacles, she faced them with confidence, knowing she'd overcome far worse. As they locked up the shop and climbed into the Rolls-Royce, Karoline glanced at Daniel and smiled. "I don't know what's next," she admitted, "but whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." With that, they drove off into the night, the headlights casting a warm glow on the road ahead. Their story wasn't finished. It was still being written, one beautiful chapter at a time.